occur? I don't know. When we got to Ottawa, we got to Ottawa in 1993. In the 93 election, Reform got 52 members, all from Western Canada, except one from Ontario. And Quebec, the Bloc Québécois got 54 members, just 2 members different. Another aside there, we lost 3 seats in Edmonton by 320 votes. If we had got those 3 seats, a Federalist Party would have been the official opposition in the 1993 Parliament instead of a separatist Parliament. And if the country had ever blown apart because the separatists won the referendum in Quebec, I was going to go back to Edmonton and say there's 325 people here because they didn't vote. Don't think your vote doesn't make a difference.
Yeah, well, you made 2 points there. One is that important decisions can be swayed by a very tiny number of people from time to time. And also, and this is one of the things I thought was particularly fascinating about what you did, is that the democratic processes are sufficiently permeable so that you can modify them substantially with considerable work, but with a small number of people.
Oh, yes. And just to finish the Quebec West connection, when we got there, we put on a breakfast for the Bloc. We got 100 new members, over 100 new members in the Parliament, a huge turnover, none of whom knew each other. So I got a hold of Lucien Bouchard, the leader of the Bloc Québécois, and said, we ought to get together, and we'll have a breakfast. We'll put on a breakfast. We'll bring the pancakes from the West. You bring the maple syrup from Quebec, and we'll have a get-to-go. And we did. I got up and gave a speech and said, we're the bunch from Western Canada. They're discontented with how the Federation is working right now, and we want to fix it. We want to change it. We want to reform it. And Lucien got up and said, we're a bunch from Quebec who are not happy with Confederation, and we want to get out. And that's where we ended up. Anyway, that's sort of an aside on the other dimension of Western Canadian politics, and this is very relevant to some of the subjects you've discussed, is there is no region of North America that has had more experience with populist movements, populist parties, and populist governments than Western Canada. And there's a lot of lessons to be learned from that. The old Progressive Party, which was like the progressives in the United States in some respect, was basically a Western-based bottom-up, not top-down party. The Farmers' Parties that governed in Alberta, governed in Manitoba, briefly governed in Ontario, were bottom-up populist parties. Both the Depression parties, the CCF, the Socialist Party, was a bottom-up party. Social Credit in Alberta was a bottom-up party. And Reform, in many respects, too, was one of those populist parties. So the West had had a lot of experience, not just with populist movements and not just populist parties, populist governments that actually got into power. And I think there's lessons to be learned from that with the populist movements of today and how you respond to them and how you lead them and how you handle them.
So how would you define a populist movement? And do you think the fact that was able to find expression in the West continually was an advantage or a disadvantage? And I suppose
well, there's 2 questions there. Well, first of all, I define it as a bottom-up rather than a top-down political movement with a lot of grassroots support and agitation rather than something coming down from the top. The other way I define it is populist parties and governments are almost always a product of the previous administrations, the administrations that preceded it. I see Trump is the legacy of Obama. Doug Ford is the legacy of Kathleen Wynne in Ontario, because you have an administration party before that gets support from a lot of people, usually from the elites, but a lot of other people as well. But it progressively loses contact and support with 50% of the population. And if it does that long enough, it will generate populist movements. So populist movements are very much a product of what was there before, and whether it accepted or alienated large chunks of the population.
So is that something that you see as a positive force altogether? Because populism often gets a bad name.
Yeah, well, I come at that, again, Western Canada's experience is, populist movements have their wild side, and they can have their extreme side, and they can be dangerous. But I would argue they also have a positive potential. And just if you take the Western Canadian experience, The first woman elected to the federal parliament was Agnes Campbell MacPhail. How did she get there? She did not get there through the Liberal Party. She did not get there through the Conservative Party. In fact, they bitterly fought her election in every election she contested. She got there through the old Progressive Party, the bottom-up party. The famous five, the so-called famous Alberta Five, that got women recognized as persons under Canadian law. 4 out of the 5 of those were members of populist movements and populist governments. So this is an accomplishment, the recognition of women as persons, the achievement of women getting elected to the legislation of the parliament was a populist achievement, not an establishment achievement. And then in the Depression parties, the CCF, the Socialist Party, whom I don't agree with, but one of their accomplishments was to get Canadian Medicare. Whether you agree with that or not, most people think that was a progressive development. You can argue about how it's done and what needs to be done in the future. But that came through a bottom-up provincial populist party. And in Alberta, the social credit regime, one of the big worries if you're the government and the party in power in a region that gets an oil boom is the danger of corruption. It happened in Texas, it happened in Oklahoma, it happened in Louisiana, it happened in California, it happened in Alaska. The federal administration of Warren G. Harding was brought down by a corruption through the oil patch. Somebody tried to bribe a federal cabinet minister in order to get drilling rights in a federal party. Almost discredited the Warren administration. And one of the great fears in Alberta was that we had this oil boom in 1947, and my father was the president, was how do you keep that from corrupting the people in power? And it was a populist party that managed to not get corrupted.
I remember you speaking about beginning your political party. You told me, correct me if I'm wrong, but you told me that you went from town to town, from city to city across Western Canada, and you had a speech or a variety of speeches that you gave, but that you were most involved in some sense with the question and answer sessions. And that enabled you to sample what people were thinking about, what their concerns were, and to weave that into policy. So that became part of a discussion between an emergent political party and the constituents.
Oh, yeah. And I think that's a distinguishing feature of populist parties. It's a receiver-oriented form of communication where you start not by what do I want to say to these people and what do I want them. You start with who are these people? What are they concerned about? Why are they here? Why is that lady in the third row who's probably got kids at home and had to make arrangements to come? What on earth is she doing at this political meeting? How would she say what I want to say to them if she was trying to explain it to her friends next door? And I used to get a lot of, I would hang around after